Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special, what day is today? Monday afternoon stream here. I have Dan Barbarisi, the author of the terrific new book, Chasing the Thrill. You know it's a good book when I can blow through it in 2 or 3 days. Dan, thanks for hopping on the show to talk about it.
Pete, pleasure to be here. You know, I've been waiting for this since we did the last version of this, whenever it was, 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, why don't just right at the top, I know we have some people in the treasure hunting community, the Fenn community that have already found their way to this stream, but how about for people who aren't initiated? Could you give your kind of elevator pitch on what Chasing the Thrill is and what the Fenn treasure hunt encompassed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Fenn treasure was a treasure that was hidden, 2010. By Forrest Fenn, who was a fighter pilot turned art dealer to the stars, essentially a Southwestern art dealer based out of Santa Fe. And, he, in 2010 or thereabouts, he wrote a book and a poem that would lead people to the treasure if they could decipher the clues hidden in there. And the treasure was put somewhere out in the Rocky Mountains, and it turned into a huge phenomenon. And over, 10 years, people went searching for it. The numbers are unclear, but it's at the very least in the many tens of thousands and probably more than that. And, over a long period of time, a lot of things happened within the chase. There was romance and death and craziness, and, it became just a really big phenomenon. And so in 2017, our dear friend BeepImaJeep, Jay Raynor, who, when I wrote Dueling with Kings, obviously DFS, etc., which came out right around that time, Jay had kind of gotten into treasure hunting right around the same time, and he found this hunt, and he basically said to me, like, this thing is amazing, we got to go do this and you should write about it. And I was like, oh my god, you are so right. How did I not know about this thing for so long? This is crazy. This is so cool. So I very quickly decided to kind of do the same type of experience I did in Dealing with Kings, and try to just dive in and immerse myself and be able to do that in order to tell the story of what was going on in this world. And so that's kind of what I did. And then, not very long after that began, I started, talking to hunters and trying to become a quote unquote treasure hunter myself. The whole thing went even crazier because 3 people died in the space of a month. And it became a real question of, should this thing continue to exist? And, there was a lot of heat on Forrest Fenn to figure out what to do with it. And so trying to kind of navigate that and tell the story and, understand what's going on in this thing and just, be a part of it. And then, basically spent the next several years in it, telling the story and trying to live the treasure hunting experience until, at long last, the treasure was actually found. And we can probably get to that at whatever point. But, so it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, it's a story that pulls you in right from the start. I remember reading your follow-up article on Outside about the treasure being found. And the drama for me was, I was like, did this make it into the book, the finality to this? Or was that kind of like a postscript and you had already shipped things? But it seemed like you had left a little bit of a buffer on the end. And I was curious about that. Like, was that just serendipitous that was wrapped up? Like, were you going to ship the book regardless of the treasure being found?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when you do something like this, you can't assume the treasure is going to be found, in the lifetime of the book. So, the timing, it was funny because the timing was like, so the treasure's found in June of 2020, and so that's right around the time I was actually delivering essentially the first draft manuscript of the book to my editors and stuff, because it was always supposed to come out right around this time this year. And so basically, I got the news that it was found, and I was like, what am I gonna do? Holy shit! I've got to rip up the whole end of this book and just try to figure it out from there. And so that's kind of what I did, and just basically, fortunately, to me, the end of the treasure hunt is not the whole story. I didn't need to redo the whole book. It was just okay, clearly there are very important things happening here, and I've got to redo the whole, basically last quarter of the book. But I still was able to keep most of the stuff in a lot of places. It was in other places, although I had to cut some stuff to create space because I couldn't just make the book a bunch longer. It was all right, chop some other stuff and figure out what fits where. But yeah, honestly, it was very much a race to the finish, very, very much. And, that stuff happening, there were still things happening in December that, appear in the book, December, January, which may not seem like a big thing, but publishers, I promise you, they do not like it when books that are coming out in May are not finished in January. They are very unhappy about that. Not that they were bad. They were awesome to me. They were so good. They fully understood that the story was developing, that it was unfolding in real time. And they gave me basically up until the last second possible. But, in book publishing, last second possible is months before. So, it was a matter of, making edits and stuff like that was very hard actually after like January or so, because things were typeset, page numbers had to meet one another. And so there's a lot of things where like I would want to make small changes and I kind of couldn't at a certain point. Because it's just, you're past that point, but yeah, this was very much like a race to the finish in every way.
Well, one thing, and we're going to dive into a lot of the story specifics here. I was always interested in some of the meta stuff of you writing it too, because I was trying to put the timeline together, because you said you started, and a lot of this happened in 2017. I was checking the timestamp when I interviewed you about Dueling with Kings back in 2017. I was like, there must have been a lot of overlap when you were doing press on that book and then had started researching and hunting for that. That had to have been a crazy time, not to even mention your wife was pregnant at the time as well.
Yes. So do you remember what month our interview was? I remember it was that spring, but I don't remember exactly when. I'm thinking it was later, like it was probably around May.
I think it was March.
Oh, it was March. We did that in March? Oh my God. I'm
going to pull it up right now to confirm. It was March 15th, 2017.
Oh, okay. My bad then. Okay. So I don't think I had discovered the hunt then. I think that was at the very earliest, the end of March or early April, when, Beep actually kind of started being like, yo, this thing is crazy. We should get in this. Yeah, I mean, it was not long after for sure. And I was still doing press for Dueling with Kings at the time when I had started on this thing. But that's what it is in Bookland. I hadn't started The Athletic yet. I still was coming off having quit the Wall Street Journal to do the last book. So I didn't have like a day job,
Yeah.
So at that point, it's okay, what's the next book? You're not going to just like do nothing. Yeah, I was, yes, at the time, my son Elliot, who was born in June of that year, was on the way, and we were actually trying to find a house at the time. So there was a lot going on. But that's okay. So, yeah, no, that was very much all right around the same time. Although I guess when we talked, I had not actually fully started on this yet. It was probably a month after. Yeah.
And I mean, how did you, I assume at that point too, you're like, you just want to dive in, you've done the participatory journalism angle before, just experience all of this. But is it also hard too with something that's so ambiguous where you truly don't know what the story is going to be? You can do background on Fenn and the treasure and stuff like that, but there's tons of different paths that this story could have ended. Like if he called it off because of the deaths, all of these different things. Did you find yourself rooting for something in particular, or were you okay to just experience it and tell that story?
Well, certainly the one particular that I was rooting for, and you called it exactly right, was that the hunt not end. I didn't want the hunt to end. I had only just gotten into it like 2 months before or 3 months before, whatever it was. It would have been like a disaster. There would have been no book, obviously, if the hunt just ended in, June or July of 2017, because I wouldn't have been able to tell enough of the story. I would have been there for like the very end of it. And who needs that? That's nothing. So, yeah, no, I didn't want the hunt to end. Absolutely not. And so, yeah, at that time I was like, oh man, this thing, I think it's so cool. It's such an incredible story. I really want to tell it. I got to see where it goes from here. So yes, the only thing I was really rooting for was it not to, disappear in that sense from a book writing point of view, because then there would have been no book for sure. I didn't sell the book to the publisher until early to mid 2018. So to do that, you need to have done a ton of reporting already. You can't just be like, hey, there's a treasure hunt, I'm going to go write a book about it. Just, pay me, man. That's not how it works. You have to present them with sample chapters and interviews and structures about how it's going to go. And, that stuff takes a long time. It took me like a year to put that all together. That's like a quarter of the book, basically, by the time you get to that stage. So, that was all that. Again, if the treasure hunt had ended, I said almost no doubt that I would not have created this. I just wouldn't have been involved enough. Yeah. I wouldn't have been part of it enough. I wouldn't have had enough material in any real way. So that was definitely crazy. But that's the thing with these things where you start in it and you don't know the ending. And Dueling with Kings was the same way. I didn't know if DFS was going to be there. And that's how that book ends with the New York hearings, which I think absolutely allowed DFS to survive and then allowed DraftKings and FanDuel to survive, which then allowed them to become what they are today, which is kind of sort of DFS companies and kind of sort of other things. That you don't know the ending, and that's part of the fun, but it's also part of the terror. And, you know, I don't know, having done, you know, 2 of these kind of books where you don't have any idea how it's going to end. I don't know if my body can handle doing another one, honestly.
Yeah.
So I don't, you know, I'm almost 42 here, man. I don't know how many more of these, you know, the old ticker can take in terms of, oh God, what's happening now? You know, where are we going to go from here? So it's very stressful, honestly. It's like, oh, well, those last 3 chapters are just useless because the treasure was just found. Delete. You know, so
how much of, because one of the interesting dynamics that plays out is you're obviously telling this story from a journalistic perspective, but you're also embedded within it. You know, when you are taking those last minute flights because there's a new solve, a new lead, how much of that is like, I got to go tell this story. This is part of being part of the story. And how much of it was you had caught the bug and you actually just wanted to go treasure hunting?
I'd say it was certainly those kind of things that you're referring to. That was more like, I got to go tell the story. The more I've got the bug feeling was more when I was out there. That's when that really takes hold, you know, when it's like, okay, I got to go run out there. I mean, yeah, it's like funny. So like the one time, and you'll probably remember it in the book, the one time when I really think I actually could have something, we might find the treasure, is when Beep comes up with like a pretty darn good solution. And he's like, just certainly on it. We head out to Yellowstone. But he wouldn't tell me what it was. At the time, he's like, this is it. This is the thing, but I can't tell you what it is on the phone. You know, who could know be listening? And I was like, all right, whatever about the listening part. But so I didn't know how much to believe him for that one. You know, I knew it was totally worth it to him. It meant so much that he was going to like haul out there right away. He needed me to go right away. But it's hard to be like, yes, we're going to go find the treasure when you don't know what your solution is, you know? And again, it wasn't my solution. It's his solution. I'm basically just tagging along effectively. And so, you know, that was more like, okay, we're gonna follow the story, see where this goes. But then when you're out there, and you know, once I knew what he had and what he was thinking of, and you're kind of in the middle of it, and the places in your eyes start to line up to, you know, what was in his mind, and you know what has become in your mind, and the tweaks I would make to it, and that kind of stuff. Then you start to feel it, you know. Then you start to be like, oh, we're gonna find the treasure, you know, and you start to get the kind of gold fever. When you're out there. And that, so I, you know, on a couple different occasions, I would feel that out in the field. I don't think I really felt it so much, you know, back looking at the book, that kind of stuff, because all my personal solutions sucked. You know, I was not particularly good at coming up with stuff. I don't think I ever had anything that wasn't like either the kind of thing that a lot of people have thought of before or somewhat derivative in that sense, you know, whereas, you know, he was coming up with things that were new, and that's cool. So even if they weren't right, they were new. Yeah. And, you know, that's great. So, you know, I just wasn't good enough at it to really have the feeling of like, I've got something, we got to go fly out and get it now.
Yeah. Did you, because like reading Jack write about it with his Medium posts, and he seems to talk a lot about it being a more simplistic reading of the text and almost applying a bit of literary analysis to the poem and his books. It seems like that would be up your alley. You didn't talk about it a lot in the book, kind of your own kind of pouring through that text. Was that not a direction that intrigued you as much, or it was just dead ends for you?
No, I mean, yeah, I just didn't, you know, I didn't think of it that way. You know, there's so much 20/20 hindsight here.
Yeah.
And, you know, he understood the right answer. I didn't intuitively do that. You know, I mean, I thought this is about Forrest Fenn. So I guess in that sense, I knew that, you know, it's like, okay, this hunt is about Fenn. You have to understand Fenn. You know, it's not so much just the poem, it's also the man. And, you know, in that sense, at least I had that concept, generally speaking, correct. But, you know, it's at the same time, you then have to do it the way Jack did it, which is apply that and understand his life and understand how that leads you on the journey that takes you to the spot that is special to Forrest Fenn. So, you know, I never made those mental connections, you know, and just, I can understand how it can seem simple that way when somebody explains to you what the right solution is. But, you know, it's like the Russians came up with the nuclear bomb in like 3 years because they knew that there was a nuclear bomb to be had. You know, they knew that, okay, if we go down some path related to nuclear stuff, we end up with this giant world destroying weapon. If you don't know that's the case, you have to go in a freaking 100 different ways. And maybe you even get there, maybe you don't. It's so much easier to not even just reverse engineer something, but to even head towards something when you know that the goal is there, because you just know you have to try different things to get there. But when you have no concept, you flail, and flailing sends you in different directions, you know? And so that's more what I was. I was like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, you know? Jack, to his great credit, you know, focused on a method right away and was, you know, extremely laser focused on that, on that concept and on the ways he did it, with few exceptions, really, from beginning to end. And I think that's what led him to the treasure, is that, he was single-minded in pursuit of it and in his pursuit of his solve, and, didn't really deviate from it much, from beginning to end. And, it's funny because if you're the person who finds the treasure, that's brilliant, and that's why you did it. If you're the person who didn't find the treasure and you were looking in southeastern Colorado or something and really devoted to yourself, then you're bad at it, So it's not fair in that sense, That's not always the best way to do it, but in this case it was.
Yeah. Shout out to the chat. I see some of your guys' hyper specific questions about things. We will try to maybe get to some of those at the end, but I do want to set the table here for some of the non-diehards if this is their introduction to learning about the book. What do you think ultimately, because you talked about this too, how the estimated value of the treasure, maybe 1 to 2 million, depending on it, but it was ultimately this narrative in the story of Fenn that took it to this other level. I've been thinking about this stuff a lot because we've now seen the NFT explosion and the art explosion. What do they say are the projects that are going to hold value? The ones that have the strong narrative in the community. And that's what this treasure ended up having, despite not having like a huge monetary reward. Like when you back out your expected value for going on these trips, the opportunity cost, the time, all of this for the reward, not to mention all the bad things that could happen to you if you are the one to find it. Why do you think people kind of threw away those calculations and became so enamored with this just for, the pun, the thrill of the chase?
Yeah, because that's not it. Like I think I said in the book, there's easier ways to get rich, including buying a lottery ticket. This is not a good path to riches. You are very unlikely to get rich this way. But, everybody, I think, in this wanted to be the one who could solve it. The money's there and the money is validating, but it's not about the money. At least I don't believe it was. I think it was about being able to beat the puzzle, being able to show that you could do it, being able to, prove it to yourself, to the other people in the chase, to Fenn to some extent. To be able to kind of be that person who was good enough and smart enough to do what everyone else couldn't. And, I think a lot of people just became very, very committed to figuring it out. It's hard, there's a sunk cost element too, once you've been on these hunts and once you're out there and, you say you're coming from the East Coast, you're going to spend probably several $1,000s spending a week out there, even if you're not paying a lot or staying at campgrounds, whatever, just all of it, all included. And if you then come home with nothing every time, I don't think a lot of times people were dissuaded by that. They were more like, all right, I've now spent so much doing this. I need to make it worthwhile. I need, I know, I prove it, it's et cetera. So, there's a lot of ways where it draws you in. And, again, I don't think it's about the money. I think it's about the solve. I think it's about being the one who could do it, because if you do that, you can do anything. If you can prove that, then nothing else you've done in your life to this point really matters. You are the person who found Forrest Fenn's treasure forever, and everything else is wiped away. If it's bad, if it's good, whatever, that's who you are. Maybe you may not want that to be the case. Maybe you do. I don't know. But it's so life-changing that it's not about the money per se. It's about the accomplishment.
Yeah. One other thing about it too was kind of the general demographic of the hunters. You mentioned the two most common age groups, 55 to 64, followed by 45 to 54. Yeah. Why do you think that was? And then, Jack, who found it, was a millennial. You and Jay, I believe, fall outside of those two popular age cohorts as well. So you guys were actually—
I'm a Gen Xer, man. Jay is a millennial, but I'm a Gen Xer. I just barely qualify in Gen X.
Barely. So why do you think that is, that it was concentrated along some of these older generations?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. I think, a lot of what Fenn does in his writings and the way he looked at the world, there's a very much like there's an Americana to it. And, he would really look back to, an olden time and say, this, even in his writings and the way he looked at the world, he was bringing things back to the America of his youth. Him tromping around rivers and lakes and all that, and Yellowstone and fishing and going on bike rides and adventures and that kind of stuff. And so, I think that was very attractive to, people who might have grown up closer to that, and who wanted to kind of get towards that element of things. I think there's definitely an element of that. It also, that could be, to some degree, just, I don't know, there are multiple reasons for it. It's just you did this on the internet, But I think a lot of the people who are younger on the internet just weren't interfacing with it in the same way. I mean, not that you didn't have younger people in it, but look, Forrest Fenn is an older guy. He spoke somewhat of a different language than, your average 22-year-old is going to. It just, in some ways, the whole treasure hunt was of a different time. And I think that was part of its appeal, actually. And so, it's funny because I don't know if some of it is also a retirement age thing. Not that, 65 can be retirement age. Obviously, 55 is certainly not always in most cases. But, I think there are certainly some people who are like, I just have left some part of the working world behind and I want something else new to quest for and occupy my brain. And a lot of people found this in so many ways. So, there's a lot of reasons. But yeah, I definitely, the demographic skewed older, no question about it. And the interesting question then, as you kind of posited, is, the fact that Jack found it, he is obviously not of that group. And so, what does that say about it, about him, about what it took to find? I don't know. I don't know if he is an anomaly in that sense or if there was something structural in the way he looked at it that allowed him to. I did think that having Beep along was an advantage because he wasn't going to think about it in the same way that other people were. And so that was, something that I looked at as, okay, this guy is not going to do the same thing that everybody else is doing. And so to be around him, that's value added in my mind. But, we didn't find stuff. So
I'm seeing some people in the chat. We got 32-year-old female. We got a 42-year-old. We got a 37 here. And the data I'm referencing, I believe it was one of the Fenn tubers who was looking at the back end of their YouTube analytics and stuff where you're able to kind of segment this out. So obviously there are anomalies and people who fall outside of that. But I did think it was interesting that those were kind of the primary cohorts there. One other thing that's interesting about this, and maybe some similarities kind of to the DFS and fantasy world, where there's this cutthroat competitive nature, everyone's trying to win. And yet part of what makes it so fun is that community aspect. There was the Fenn'S, there's the message boards, there's everyone sharing their solves, almost to the point where it's hilarious, where people love to talk more than they like, having their edge kept to themselves. What were the kind of different ways you saw that dynamic playing out of the social aspect of it, the community, but people still wanting to make sure that they were the ones to find the treasure?
Yeah, I think very similar to DFS in that way. And a lot of that is because they are both, insular communities where people outside it may have like a very surface level understanding of what you're doing, but they don't really get it, Like when you tell somebody, let's think back 2015, or like you tell somebody you're like a big DFS player, and they'd be like, oh, you do fantasy stuff? Oh, you do that thing from TV? Or, all right, whatever. They didn't really understand, and it would be very hard to explain it to them, without really going into a lot of stuff, right before. Obviously, then it got, even bigger and people understood. But, and, this is the same kind of thing. Oh, you're a treasure hunter? What does that even mean? Well, I search for the Fenn treasure. It's this specific thing. So are you like going in galleons to the bottom of the ocean? No, it's not that. It's this thing. So, people who are into these worlds, have an understanding of it, and people outside it just generally don't. And so that's, one thing I was trying to accomplish with both books was to try to say to people outside the world, okay, here's what this is about. Here's why this is. Here's why it matters. Here's why it appeals to people. And that was really the goal in both cases. And just, I think that, you hit on it correctly in that there is, when people understand each other, even if they're in competition, there's a kinship there, even if, the competition was more direct in DFS because nightly you would get beaten by, the testosterones of the world and all that. And just to think back to a name that used to crush me all the time. The various people who would win all the time, and you would see them, and then you would see them at events and that kind of stuff. And, in DFS, in the treasure hunt, until one guy won, nobody was winning. So, you could say that this person has better solves or not, but there was no real objective way of really proving that. So everybody was actually on more equal footing, I would say. Everybody was equally good or equally bad, depending on how you wanted to look at it. And so, I think that does lead to a greater degree of kinship there. Although it's funny because, depending on the situation and depending on the people, you go to these events and some of them, everyone's like, I'm very distant. I'm not going to tell you myself. And then sometimes some people would just be like, all right, here's what I got. Here's my thing. And you're like, what do you think of it? Like, oh, I don't know. And so you would really run into all kinds of the spectrum there. Some people really, really wanted to tell you what their solve was and get it out there. And sometimes, have you say, wow, that's so smart. You're so smart, that kind of thing. And then some people would be like, I'm not telling you anything. And so really all over the place in terms of, that experience. But I think, huge similarities, there's not there's a reason I did both books. The communities are very similar in a lot of the structural things about them. And, again, the approach was going to work similarly, I thought, and this wasn't reinventing the wheel from one time to the next. This was honestly trying to perfect the formula. Yeah. So, there's a lot of similarities there that I saw from the very beginning. And then I tried to apply a lot of the things I learned from doing the DFS book here. Yeah.
And another thing that I thought was interesting was hearing about kind of the different approaches to how people were thinking about it. Some definitely on the hopium side, like, I just want this to be the solution and I'm not going to take, new information to dissuade me, versus thinking about you and Beep, who have a DFS background. You're used to thinking probabilistically. You're used to thinking rationally. Yet on the other side of the coin, as we saw with Beep, like, you almost need some like hopeful, irrationalness, to continue to go after it, because it is so unlikely. So how do you guys balance that? Because I assume that's hard to think probabilistically and knowing, like, we're likely not going to find it today, but you need something to keep hanging in front of you to give you the motivation to go after it.
Yeah, it's funny because you know him. He likes to like handicap odds all the time on stuff and throw out probabilities. He would throw out these numbers. He'd be like, I think we're 10% live to find it. I would be like, that is insane. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
We are like 0.10% would be so dramatically overstating it. Dude, come on. But at the same time, you do need that. You need that, 100%. You need that kind of like, I'm going to be out there, I'm going to get it, because otherwise, what's the point? You're just out for a long walk in the woods, and that doesn't do much for you. So I think that you have to not look at it perfectly rationally. You have to look, because if you're looking at this by the numbers, you're not going to find it. Your odds are horrific. So like, you can't look at it that way. And you need to have that element of, this is going to happen. I'm in this, I got this, and so honestly, he had that for both of us. And I was much more just like, we're never going to find anything. We're screwed. And that was fine because it balanced out that way. But one thing I was surprised about in dealing with hunters was how, positive many of them were, so many of them, about that they were going to find the treasure. That, again, your odds are bad. They are very, very bad. But, people believed in their solves to a great extent, and they continue to believe in their solves to a great extent. And, obviously only one person can be right. But, that's not what this is about. This is about believing in something, believing in your ability to be a part of it, believing in your ability to solve it and beat it. And that's good. People should have these kind of things to dream on and search for. And, somebody's going to be right eventually. Well, somebody was right. I guess somebody didn't have to be right, but somebody was in this case. And that's good. It's just because this is an extremely low probability thing, that's not bad. That can be really, really good in some ways, because it makes everybody have an equally terrible shot and makes everybody equally wrong and equally right, and lets them, equally dream on it and quest for it.
Yeah. What I feel like, the story after you and Beep did one of your kind of final hunts together, you kind of stick the landing for the story, telling the end game, going to visit the treasure. How did Beep's kind of relationship with this hunt end? Because it kind of felt like a little abrupt for him in the book. Was it kind of a slow fade where he lost interest? What has been some of his thoughts on all the things that have transpired in the last year?
I think... in that kind of peak period, in that 2018 period, we were both a little crazy on it. I think he recognized that he had gotten a little too deep into this, and that it actually, I think, kind of caused him to reassess his priorities in some ways about his life on some things, and to, maybe try not to run so hot on certain things, and to try to take a step back on some of this stuff and understand, okay, here's what's important, here's not. He has said this to me, at least, that, I think in some ways this was a really productive thing for him to kind of take another look at life and say, like, okay, maybe don't just dive into everything like face first into the pool, so that there can be danger in doing that. And so I think this ultimately ended up being like a really good thing for him. And he's very happy to have been a part of it. I think when the treasure was found, he had some regret. We all did, it was like, this thing's not out there anymore. That you feel the loss of it. I don't think he was super like beat up about it. I think at that point he had mostly moved on. I think, the last kind of searches we did in 2019, I think he was at that point kind of like, all right, I'm good on this. Not that it wasn't in his head anymore, but it wasn't plaguing him in the same way. And so, by the time it was actually found, I think he was mostly okay on that. But, I think he has said that, like, it really, caused him to have some kind of introspection on a lot of things, just being involved in this hunt.
Yeah. And I imagine it was hard too, because, I'm sure there's a Venn diagram for you guys and the things that you're getting out of this hunt. And I'm sure there's some overlap, but you telling this story, writing a book is going to be a lot different for Jay, for whatever, things he's working out in his life, or the experience he gets from that, or the distraction to pour himself into something other than DFS or crypto investing. And I thought it was also interesting. There's the scene where his friend Tyler joins you guys, and there's tensions, haggling over the splits and stuff. And you were pretty kind of quick to be like, hey, I'll just drop my percentage, because it almost seems like, again, you were more in this for telling the story, being a part of it on the front lines. But then someone like Tyler, who just jumps in, well, it's all about what's my reward. Right. So I think that was also interesting to kind of figure out, you guys hunting together, but knowing that your motivations might not always be on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And like, that whole time was such a crazy time. And like, Tyler is like an A+ awesome dude. And I totally get it. Just like a great guy. And then he gets involved in this situation with these two crazy people, me and Jay, who are like in this thing, and we're like, super into it. And he just wants to go, understandably, for like a cool trip to Yellowstone. And all of a sudden it's like chaos time. And, Jay is like, super into it. And he's just had this whole problem with his girlfriend and everything related to this. And, I've got my own, again, motivations about telling the story, but wanting to be a part of the whole thing. And, Tyler just thinks he's out there for a cool time. And like, it's just, it went in a direction I think none of us expected it to go. But, it was definitely like a little weird there for a while. And that's too bad, because Tyler's awesome. And like, I like to think that's not, an issue anymore, but like, it was like, that's what this thing makes you do. It gets you a little crazy, is the reality of it, and that's cool. That's part of it. That's part of the allure of it. And that's also part of the problem with it, and not that it's a problem, but that's what it's going to make you do. It's going to make you feel. It's going to make you go in directions you didn't really expect to go. And, it certainly did that with Jay, for no question.
Yeah. I have another meta question for you. I was fascinated by what your writing, transcribing, recording process was. You recall a lot of conversations in vivid detail when you're out on the hunt, even your time in Fenn's home. Are you recording these? Are you constantly taking down notes? Because I was thinking of myself being the journalist in that standpoint. I'm like, I would either be in my notebook all of the time, or I wouldn't be getting every one of these details right, which is why you're the journalist and I'm not. But I was curious about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, most of the scenes and almost all the quotes in the book are from recordings. So, with very few exceptions. So yeah, all those times in Fenn's house, I'd have a recorder sitting out there, there's no hiding this kind of stuff. It's not like that. But so that then, and I would write down stuff, sure. But that was more signposting for me for later, for the most part, and that's the thing I used to do earlier in my, capital R reporter career. I would, write down full quotes. But when you're doing that, and you're trying to remember what this person said 6 seconds ago, 5 seconds ago, 4 seconds ago, 3 seconds ago, your mind is not moving on to the next thing. So, I have become somebody much more who just takes signposting notes, essentially, like, 32 of interview, this thing, that happened, he says this, and then I just go through the recorder later and just, transcribe the whole thing and go through it and listen to it again. And you pick up so much more again the second time, third time. It's a very labor intensive process, but you get things exactly right. And, you have, I think, even a deeper understanding a lot of times of what people were really trying to say. And, there's many times when I go back to these things and I'm like, oh, he was saying that, I should have asked this, but you can't pick up on that in the moment a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, so pretty much everything in there is, off various recordings. And later, the technology for voice recording software got a little better, and the program Otter, which you may have heard of, came out and is really good. And so some of the late interviews in the book were transcribed via Otter, and then I can be able to go through them and just kind of clean them up, versus having to write out a 3-hour interview, which can take, transcribing a 3-hour Forrest Fenn interview can take you 9-10 hours. This is not easy work. Honestly, it's very time consuming. But yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because in my early, mid 2000s, journalistic career, Boston Globe, Providence Journal, that kind of stuff, I would not use a recorder on things. And looking back on that, I'm like, oh my God, I was such an idiot. I wish I could go back to that me then and be like, record everything all the time, man. Come on. So, look, the technology was different then. You didn't have just digital recorders. You could plug into something, dump a file. You had to literally have a tape. And, these were big tape recorders that you'd be holding up and rewind the tape, fast forward the tape, rewind the tape, fast forward the tape. It was not that easy, but At the same time, just so incredibly worthwhile.
Yeah. So even like when you were out hiking with Cynthia and stuff, you were recording?
Yeah. Not every second, but yeah. I mean, and then, you go over these very loud, very windy recordings and, and you can hear what you're saying, but it's not easy. But yeah, and there's so much that, it allows you to both live in the moment and then revisit the moment later.
Yeah.
And so then you live it again. Look, it's very labor intensive on the back end, but I think it's worth it because you get everything exactly right. And that's very important, and it also allows you to, again, put yourself back in those experiences. I would also take notes, particularly on, on thoughts I had. And, there's a lot of lines in both books where, it'll like, I'll come up with almost like a one-liner or a way to describe something. And I wrote that down in the moment before it went away, but that's not the same as, taking notes about, well, this person walked there, this person walked there. But there's a lot of lines that, and again, in both books that are like that.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a very, very long recording somewhere of like the 3 hours of the 2016 DFS hockey final. Which is the whole thing of me, saying random quotes to random people. And some of those do appear in the book. So
I've done a few of those kind of audio podcast projects too, where you're having to sift through so much audio, and man, it is daunting.
Brutal.
One other dynamic that I think is interesting with the book too is you learning more about Fenn. There's some breadcrumbs at the beginning, people alluding to maybe some more unsavory behavior. We end up finding about some of these kind of, sexual harassment maybe issues, as well as kind of his lack of remorse for some of the deaths involved in the hunt. Was it a struggle for you as you kind of peeled back the layers to Fenn? Like, were you ever worried, like, I might discover that he's just not a good guy and I don't want to spend my time glorifying this hunt? Or were you always kind of feeling like, I'm just going to tell the truth of this story, even if that truth is ugly?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I looked at the job, honestly, was just like, wherever it goes is where I should go. If people are talking about it, if it's there, if I believe something is generally speaking true, I should put it in. Just try to tell the whole story of the hunt, because I looked at this as very much like a history book. This is intended for people 15, 20 years from now to go back to this thing and say, like, what happened here? What was involved in this? What was this about? And so, you try to kind of just tell that as reliably as you can. And, in some degree, because of the style I took to this, you are forced to put some of your own value judgments on it to some extent, which is not something, honestly, I'm like thrilled to do, but I think it's kind of necessary in this case. And so, you end up doing that to the extent that is possible, without trying to then also skew things too dramatically. And because, like, in so many of these, there's a lot that's been happening with these over a long period of time. Some of these things happened before I was involved in the hunt. You're reconstructing things from years before. So these are complicated, sensitive questions, complicated, sensitive issues. You try to treat them that way. But, in my mind, it was important to try to tell the whole story as completely as possible. And, if people in the hunt are talking about it, if people in the hunt are aware of these things, then it's your responsibility to talk about them and to address them and to include them, because they're a part of the story. Yeah.
And it seemed like there are lots of reasons for why hunters wanted to get close with Fenn, whether they thought they could get a tidbit that might help them with a solve, or whether to flex on other hunters. Hey, I have this access and you don't. Good. I was curious about that too, of kind of the different motivations for getting close to Fenn, because it does seem like some people, and you listen to Jack write about his relationship with Fenn, and it seems like there's a legitimate bond there. What do you think those kind of relationships were for Fenn? Because it seemed like he had tons of individual relationships with all of these hunters.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, he definitely enjoyed, certainly before it was like really, really huge, he really enjoyed having all these people who loved his treasure hunt and, who wanted to talk to him about it. And again, let's not forget that his treasure hunt was about him. I mean, if you're talking about Fenn's treasure hunt, you're reading through his stories of his life. So, these people are suddenly people who get to know him and his tale very, very well, and are reading about, his days down at the fishing hole in, 1948 and that kind of stuff. And, his life and in so many ways. And, you can see why, Fenn found all of this very appealing and very attractive. And, he has all these people who suddenly care about the things of his past and care about him. And look, he was always a very friendly guy, somebody, who he was very much a charismatic person. He enjoyed other people. He enjoyed making friends. He enjoyed the showman element of it. He was a real character, all that jazz. He was into that. And so, I think certainly for the first few years when he had kind of a smaller community who were really into his hunt, he thought, this is a blast, this is a gas, Obviously it grew to, I think, levels that he never could have expected and never could have anticipated. And from that, then things got a little out of hand at times. And obviously there were dangerous people involved. And, look, you get anything big enough, you're going to attract some people who probably shouldn't be involved in it. And that's too bad. But he still would communicate with most of his hunters, and even some of the people who, did things wrong, he stayed in touch with, like the guy who broke into his house, and stole a laundry chest. He stayed in touch. I think he almost had a help, like, I'm going to rehabilitate this guy. I'm going to help this guy. I think he did feel a sense of responsibility there. And certainly with the people who died, that's a tough situation because he cared about them. He cared that they died. There was no, it wasn't like he didn't. At the same time, he also cared about his treasure hunt. And, he had to keep these things in relative context, and he didn't want his hunt to end. These are complicated problems when you're in Forrest Fenn's shoes. And, essentially nobody ever has been in this specific situation. Nobody has been the guy who created the treasure hunt that then killed a bunch of people, who then has to decide how to deal with the people calling for the end of the treasure hunt while the treasure hunt is still going on and everyone else is searching for it. Like, there's no roadmap for that. There's no, well, this guy did this. You're making up as you go. So he was in a lot of tricky situations on a lot of levels. And, he had to deal with all that kind of stuff. So, it's like, I got to know Fenn reasonably well. At the same time, I don't feel like I knew Fenn deeply. I think he was a guy who was a very complex person, who had a lot of levels and a lot of layers to him. And, he would show the world or show you, what he wanted to show you at the time. And, there are times when I felt like I got in for sure. And then times when I felt like I didn't. And so, that's all part of it with him.
And I was also thinking about that kind of the multifaceted, multiple layers to his character, the personas, his motivations, how that's what made the hunt fun in a lot of ways. People trying to pick up these breadcrumbs, these little clues, anything they said to him in passing, reading into it. On the other hand, the treasure's found, and now there's all these conspiracies and doubt about what happened. And I was wondering, was this always going to be the case because he created this kind of shroud of mystery? I don't want to use the term like gaslit, but was like the community kind of gaslit in a way that no matter what happened, there was going to be doubts? Was there ever going to be a clean ending to this where people were like, oh yeah, I feel like I have closure?
I think there are ways that could have gotten closer to that. I don't know that there ever would have been that entirely. I think there are going to be people, who were always going to have doubts no matter what happened. But at the same time, not knowing who found it from the start, not knowing where it has been, where it was all those years. Those are things that are going to contribute to questions. Fenn initially not giving people as much information as they wanted at the kind of rollout of it. That's going to contribute to people having questions. The kind of trickle of information, the way it came out. And then ultimately, not that it's his fault, but him dying, that's going to contribute to people having questions. So, there's a lot of things. Look, I think there are definitely scenarios where there could have been fewer conspiracy theories flying around this than there are, or there were, or there are. And there's ways that it could have been less so. But I also think that there's certainly some percentage of people who, no matter what happened, were going to disbelieve. The same people who, over 10 years were, like, this thing is a hoax to begin with. It's all so there are reasons to ask those questions, but there's also some ways to ask them where, you're just never going to believe. And so, those things, they exist together to some extent. But it's in treasure hunts in the past, a lot of them did end in, suspect circumstances. So, you can understand why the treasure hunting community, there is some precedent to look back and say, some of these things didn't end on the up and up before. And so I'm going to, translate that forward here, even if there isn't directly evidence of reasons to do that.
Yeah. And I also, another thing that was interesting to me is, with the location still unknown, we know it's in Wyoming. I was thinking that for a lot of these people who had invested a lot of time and emotional capital into going after this, that this would almost be like a fun new chapter. And I know the treasure's not there anymore. And I'm sure there are people still working on the solve, but it seems like there could still be closure or something special about finding that location by going back and trying to find that. Is that something that's happening, or is now that the treasure's out that people are just like, I don't know what to do with this anymore?
Yeah, no, there definitely are. There are people who are doing exactly what you just mentioned, who are going and, and trying to find the location of it and really trying to chase that down, even though there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's just the end of the rainbow.
Yeah.
But that's worthwhile enough to, a fair number of people, I think, who are very interested in that. And that's, the goal in a lot of ways for a lot of people is to figure that out and just know that they got to the end of this thing, even if there's no money at the end, which again, speaks to what we were saying before. It's not about the money in so many ways. It's about figuring it out, this quest you've been on, solving it, ending it, So there are people who are working on that right now. And I think, as the summer months come, you're going to see a lot of people venturing out in that way.
Did you find because you were hunting for it, you went down lots of rabbit holes. Now you have a little more information. Did you find yourself reviewing some of your solve ideas, thinking, oh, maybe I actually do know where this location is?
Well, look, again, let's be very clear. My solve ideas sucked. So most of the time I thought the treasure was in New Mexico. So I clearly had no idea what I was talking about anyway. Jays were more in Yellowstone and Wyoming, but I was like, no. And so, there was nothing I went back to, but at the same time, I'm also in a weird position because yes, I do, had more access and, certainly for the last 6 months, more information that I had that wasn't in, because the book wasn't out yet, and other stuff too, that would probably put me in a better position than other people. But at the same time, then I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be the conduit for people who are looking to find the treasure to go through me and say, is this right? Do you know this? Do you want this? Then people end up pumping me for information instead of, pumping Jack, because then I'm close. And I don't want to be that. So that's not what I see my role as here. I don't think that's the right place for me. That's not where I want to be. So honestly, I have not applied Jack's information and tried to go back and reverse engineer it. I have not done any of that, very intentionally not done any of that. That's just not a position I want to put myself in. So, somebody else can go do whatever they want. That's not where I'm going to be.
Yeah. So for you personally, is there closure to this story? Is there a nice bow around it? Is there anything that would cause you to write another 5,000 word piece in Outside magazine? Or is this for you kind of the end of your relationship with this story after you do this press tour?
No, it's not the end of it for sure. I mean, I consider the story not, we just still don't know what's going to happen with the chest. There's still stuff out there. I don't consider the story fully over. It's mostly over, that's for sure. And I think anyone who does not think that is not perhaps looking at it, clear-eyed. But, there's still more to be said about this. There are still more things to happen, and who knows what direction it goes. That's, again, you start these projects, you don't know the ending. I think I got to an ending enough, that's for sure. But, if I had another year to work on the book, there would be more of an ending. I would probably know where the chest got sold to and that kind of stuff. So, look, that's what paperback editions are for. That's what epilogues are for. So, I do have a chance to likely, revisit this kind of stuff in a year. So I'm maybe not as evolved as I was, but, certainly, I'm curious to see where things go from here, and to be able to, try to update that if that's the case, and, kind of see what happens.
Yeah, and I would say one of your best solves of the whole book is how you figured out how to contact Jay in that Medium article. Do you think being in the mindset of being a treasure hunter, helped you think through how in the world can I contact him? Because I found that to be pretty savvy.
That's interesting. No, I don't know if the treasure hunter part of it, I think that was more of the, the journalist, what way can I get the information? How can I get myself into the situation and find the person? But maybe, I don't know, maybe it all kind of goes together. I honestly don't know. I do like that as a concept. I think that's a cool idea. I'm going to think on that. I don't know, but yes, that was obviously a big moment for me when, I was able to contact him and he actually, wrote back, and it was like, yes, because then, maybe you're rolling the story forward a little bit. Maybe you're, being able to help say something about it. And obviously for my purposes, that was obviously a good thing, but also I was going to get more information than what we had at the time, which was basically zilch. So, that at that time, I'm still trying to end a book. And all I know is we know the treasure's in Wyoming. Somebody found it and Forrest Fenn's dead. So, my avenues seem to have closed very quickly at that point, because I had expected to go and talk to Fenn about it again, probably, try to fly out to Santa Fe sometime that fall, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh God, what do I do now? And so then, fortunately for me, the finder revealed himself and then was willing to talk to me. And so, I was able to go in that direction, but I obviously did not anticipate that happening.
Yeah. And do you think, what do you think made Jack willing to talk to you? It doesn't seem like he's done a ton of other press. He has his Medium blog where he's done a few posts, kind of cryptically answered a few questions. But was it just kind of your journalistic reputation that kind of helped you land that?
He has said that, it was some degree of, he had read some of my stuff before. But then also, he kind of, I think, knew what I was doing in this project in that sense, that I existed in this world. And so he was at least willing to entertain that. And then, over the course of a long period of time, we went back and forth with me trying to convince him that, this was worth his talking to me and worth participating. And, he has said that ultimately, like, I convinced him that, this book was going to be at least some sort of definitive work on the Fenn treasure. And so, there is a responsibility there almost, or here's a reason for him to be involved because he's such obviously then an important part of the story. And, if this book didn't have him in it, then there's a big part out. And, I think his hope was that this would to some degree be at least what I was selling, that if there's a definitive tale here, that this tells people years from now, okay, what happened here? And I think Jack, feels a real responsibility to this treasure hunt, that he is an important part of it now, obviously. And he feels, a level of that, again, the word being responsibility, that he has things he should do because he has a role to play here in this community. He was a fortunate searcher where other people were not. And, I think that's why he answers a lot of emails from searchers. I think that's why, he feels a responsibility, I think, certainly to, to the spot in that's, a lot of people don't like this, but that's why he doesn't, tell where it is. I think he feels that there are certain things he should do right in this. And, I may have benefited from that in that I think he felt that, and this is me thinking what he thinks, so who knows, but that, he felt that the right thing to do was to try to participate in this, and hopefully then, the story is more complete and, people, again, looking at this years from now can say, okay, I understand this more now. This makes sense. And the story is more completely told.
Do you still have questions for Jack or things you'd like to learn? Do we have updates on, I know he mentioned that he has the treasure in a safe and he's prepping to sell it eventually. Do we have any other details on that?
I think there are things that are probably going to come out in the near future about that, is my guess. Look, there's things I'd like to know. At the same time, we made some essentially guidelines on this where I wasn't going to pump him on certain types of information. Doesn't mean I'm not curious about those specific things, but you make arrangements and you honor those arrangements, and that I'm totally cool by that. That's no problem from my end. Doesn't mean you're not curious about certain things, but I feel pretty good about the things, we was able to report there, and be able to talk to him about. And, it's, at this point, my responsibility, I feel, was to tell the story. And I feel like for the most part, I was able to do that. And I was pretty happy about that.
I see the chat talking about the blaze, obviously one of the key words in the poem, in one of the hints, and also one of the better passages of your book when you were talking about that river with the bright orange glow in Yellowstone. And I felt I was like, that seems like a blaze to me. Do you have any new thoughts on what that blaze could be? I was reading Jack's post this morning, and the more he wrote about the blaze, the more I was like, what the hell is this?
It's I don't know what the blaze was, and I don't know what the fake blaze was either, which is a fascinating thing. It's funny. Like, definitely when we saw that thing, I was like so unbelievably convinced we were going to find the treasure. That was the moment in this, for that 10 minutes when I was like, oh my God, the world is about to go crazy. But it turns out that orange rivers of fire just exist in the world. Who knew? So it's kind of a crazy thing, but look, that's the cool thing about this. You get to go and explore and adventure and find that kind of stuff. And so fine. So you didn't find a treasure chest. You got to see a river of fire, it's okay. Like, everybody wins in the end, so.
For sure. I think my friend Pete Manzinelli might want to ask you a question if we have a chance here. How about that? Because I might just need to dip off screen to let him in. So how about we do this? Let's get a question from the chat, and Dan, okay. I'll put that question up. And maybe you could answer it for a second while my friend Pete Manzinelli comes in here. And in the meantime, guys, I know a lot of the hardcores have already poured through this, but I can't recommend this enough. Chasing the Thrill. I have the link in the show notes down below. An extremely fun book. And if you're in the world of DFS too and fantasy and haven't read Dueling with Kings, equally enjoyable, total page turners. Really, really enjoyed it, Dan.
Thank you. Hey, Pete, I appreciate it so much, man. I mean, it's super cool. I love that we got to do this again years later on a different subject. That was one of the more fun interviews I had on the last book. So I'm super into getting to do this again. I know, maybe getting to talk to Pete is not the same as getting to talk to Manz, but maybe there's a chance to talk here. I'm excited to hear that. So, this has been great. And, I'm happy I could get to come on again.
Yeah, for Huli, I am not a searcher. I just read the book and took notes, so that's why it seems like I'm clued in. But I will tell you, having read through a bunch of Jack's posts this morning and been in there, I felt the slight pull. I'm like, I want to figure out where this spot in Wyoming is. So I get what it's like to have the bug. The closest I ever had to a good treasure hunting experience, I was back home in Colorado. The Denver Nuggets were playing in the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers. It was when we had made a big run in 2009. And the Nuggets had partnered up for a treasure hunt around Denver where they had placed blue basketballs and given clues. And for each ball you had, you would get entered into a prize to win courtside tickets for a Western Conference Finals game. So I had my brother at a Starbucks in downtown Denver doing research, me and my friend driving all around the greater Denver area, jumping out of things. We ended up finding one ball underneath a park bench in downtown Denver, sprinting as other people were trying to sprint for it. So trust me, I've been caught up in one of these searches. It's an intoxicating feeling.
Dude, that is legit. I'm impressed.
Yeah. Okay. I am going to, Dan, see, some of these I don't even know the question. If this is what, is this something you want to talk about, or should I get a more generic question?
Let's get a broader question. Sorry, Candy. Let's get a broader question than that.
Yeah, let's get a broader question, guys. Here, I'm happy to ask one. Okay, this one's good. Ask Dan if he's ever nervous for upcoming interviewers who might expect to obtain secret info. I'm going to drop off as Dan answers this one.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I mean, nervous, I don't think would be the right word. I mean, look, in this kind of thing, you need to understand that, there's a certain segment of people who are talking to you because they think that you're going to let something slip. And that's not my goal at all. There's a certain segment of people who actually want to know about the book and stuff. And that's awesome. I'm thrilled about that. I do understand that, some percentage of the audience I'm talking to is here because they want to know, something about the treasure. And, again, that's part of why I've tried to put myself in the position to not know things. My inclination is not always to not know, but in this case it is, because I think that protects my source who doesn't want people to know something the best, And so if I don't know where the treasure is, which I don't, and if I don't actively try to find out where the treasure is, then I just don't know it. And I can't, inadvertently screw something up for somebody who doesn't want that information out there and somebody who trusted me. So, that's like a tricky thing, because I do understand that there are people who are just hanging on every word. And, when I say, something about one thing, they take something that I never intended out of it. And that is a tough position to be in, because you end up having to kind of guard the things you say more closely. And that's not the best and most fun way to talk. I'd rather just, you can tell I'm loud and emotive and say this, say that. I enjoy doing that. And, it is sometimes not my natural way to be, more conscious of that. But, that's the way it is in this. And I understand that.
Yo, dude, what's up? Are we talking about treasures here, or what's going on?
Oh my God, is it the Manz?
Dude, is that my dude, Dan Barbarisi, the duo with Kings?
It's been a while. What have you been doing?
Dude, I've been crushing. I took a long hiatus, and then I saw these NFTs pop up, and I was like, dude, I think this is a great opportunity for me to return and make some money. I made a bunch of Ethereums like your boy Beeps, and then the market crashed, so I'm not as rich as I thought I was about a month ago.
Yeah, dude, that sucks. But I bet you were all in on the Top Shot thing, weren't you?
Oh yeah,
we've been probably all in on the Top Shot thing.
We've been in on the Top Shot stuff. You mentioned in your books that Beeps was buying Ethereums at $50. Did he convince you to buy any cryptocurrencies?
I'm such a fail. I'm like the biggest fail of all fails. Like he did convince me to buy Bitcoin back then, and I did, and I doubled my money twice on it, and it was like, who cares? I think I had it at 3 and sold it at 6, then I had it at 6 and sold it at 12, and I thought I was the smartest guy in the room, and I am definitely not the smartest guy in the room. I blew that completely. I never had any ether. I just, just big fail. That is like, I suck.
Dude, well, I mean, we got a bunch of like treasure hunters, I've told you, about Manz coin, right?
I haven't heard about Manz coin. This sounds like a big thing. Oh my God, dude, I'm excited.
Well, talk about a treasure chest here, dude. Fenn can't hold a candle to all of these silver Manz coins that I have here. So for those who are uninitiated, Manz coin was the world's first physical cryptocurrency. And then I created a digital NFT, which was a representation of the physical cryptocurrency, which in itself was a representation of a digital currency. And now, after hearing about this book, I'm thinking about burying these all somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains.
Dude, crossover episode. I like that.
Yeah, dude. Everybody's hungry for a new treasure hunt, right? Do they want me to bury some Manz coins?
I think that would be huge. I think that's a great idea. I think that is a great way to get them to, rise in value. I think in 1,000 years, Manz coin could be invaluable if you did that. That would be insane.
We have all the Fenn heads, dude. The Fenn heads here, they were enjoying all the content. Now they're going, what the fuck is going on? Well, now the tables have turned because I didn't know what the fuck you guys were talking about in the chat either. So now we're even. Now, what they do, I was thinking, oh, Jesus, if I go and hide this, Fenn was very particular about not burying it because he didn't want people digging shit up. Are you thinking I should probably find like a nook for this as opposed to burying it deep in the ground? Would that be smart?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got kind of a formula to follow here. The problem is that chest is very, very bright. I think you could see that from further away. You might want to like paint it darker or something before you did that. Otherwise somebody's just going to like stumble on that from 50 feet away. That is a no messing around chest though. Is that the combo?
So the combo is 069. I already told you the solve. I might have to change it. The password will either be 069 or 420, one of those two, and the whole hunt will be which one of those two is it.
Oh my God, I can't wait to be on this hunt. I am energized for this treasure hunt. I can't wait to be a part of this. There's the next book.
I'm going to call
the hunt for Manz coin.
I'm going to call up your boss at The Athletic and say Dan Barbarisi needs to take some time off. He's going to be hiking in the Appalachians trying to find buried Manz coin treasure.
Oh, these are going to be in the Appalachians? Okay, that's good. In East Coast, that's much easier for me. I totally appreciate that. I can drive to the spot. That's great. Man, these flights, they were getting expensive.
And this is right, Willis. I'm going to have my own blaze. It's going to be a 420 blaze. You got to get toked up, just super zooted to be able to find my treasure.
Oh man, this is where this needed to go. This is the good combination here.
All right, dudes, I'm going to let Mr. Barbarisi's get on the road. As we said, Chasing the Thrill, super dope book. Are you doing other interviews? I see some people in the chat are excited about another upcoming appearance. What else you got to plug other than the good book here?
Yeah, I think 2 nights from now, I'm going to be in conversation with Jason Gay. You may remember him from Wall Street Journal. He used to be my coworker there. He's a great dude. We're going to be talking, at Powell's Books. We're doing a virtual event. That's definitely on my Twitter feed. That's going to be really cool. I think I've got another event the night after that. And then I believe one of the people who's been in the chat here, Chasing Indy, I'm doing her show next week, I believe. So, got a couple others in there at various points. I got a whole schedule. My publicist sends me various points. I'm supposed to do those. So, I talk a lot, I guess.
There you go. I'm glad I didn't have to deal with the publicist. I could just go straight to the horse's mouth, dude. Slid into those DMs. Dan Barbarisi's Chasing the Thrill. I'm Pete Overzet, a.k.a. Pete Manzinelli. Thank you for tuning in today. We'll see you guys next time.